Yeah.
Okay. It'll.
I think it's a sound check. I'll change that to the other one.
Whoops, sorry.
I'll be using this one.
We're using that one.
Okay, because I had changed the microphone to the small one here.
So is the microphone on the right?
Goes off the information except for the gray one you just
I'm always happy to fix things. But I don't like it.
I think it's just remove the other message.
What was the route?
It was great.
What are the
I think
choices?
that's a thing.
Microphone.
Like that. So
Were there people waiting on the live stream? Is there people on that?
I didn't sign up. Yeah, I think I just, I missed the email at first and then by the time.
We can do a quick body adjustment. You're gonna go by.
So I'm kind of worried about that, yeah.
This whole time.
Right.
Are we ready?
We're good.
Okay.
They asked me.
Are y'all ready?
We as faculty also.
Well, guys, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Iris Carroll, and I'm a librarian here at MJC. And this is my colleague, Stella Baratlis, and she is also a librarian here. And we're going to be facilitating the discussion today. We're really glad that you could join us. And I want to stress, I have this vision in my head of how this is going to work. And I envision it as you feel like you're in a really safe place where students and faculty can all share their ideas, frustrations, fears, hopes about this new landscape that we all find ourselves in. No one up here is an expert on artificial intelligence. It's new for all of us and we're learning together. Just to begin with, and so we're kind of on the same baseline level of knowledge, I want to introduce the concept of AI very broadly. AI, as we're thinking of it, is computer software. It's software that learns by example. Large language models like ChatGPT are trained on huge amounts of data, like text and images, that are mostly culled or taken from the free web. The rate at which the software can process information and create, write, read is way beyond what we can do as human beings. The software uses algorithms, which refers to a set of instructions or rules that the software has been given that enables it to learn. ChatGPT and other generative AI software is programmed to create responses to questions based on the data on which it's been trained. So that's something you'll hear over and over again. It is trained on data that people have written and that people are feeding it in huge quantities. And most of it, again, is from the free web. So what happens is the program will generate a string of words that it predicts will be the best answer to questions you've posed, once again, based on the data on which it's been trained. So with that in mind, let's get the conversation going.
All right, so it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Thank you. And side note, don't wear a necklace when you have a lapel mic. So from closest to me, to your left is Mason Crump, student and forensics team member. Ryan Guy, professor of communication studies. Olga Castaneda, director of the Learning Center. Kathleen Ennis, professor, librarian. Oh, I'm sorry. Before Kathleen, Penelope Lee, student. Sorry about that, Penelope. Student and Learning Center tutor. And Kathleen Ennis, professor, librarian. And then Andrew Kratzman, professor of English. Thank you.
So what we're planning on doing is we've got a series of questions that we're going to ask them. We're hoping to do 5 minutes per question, which should take us to about 35 minutes. And then we're going to open it up for questions and discussion. And once again, I really hope that people feel free, students feel free to ask questions and interact with faculty about this new technology that we're all learning together. So, Ryan, you're it. How do you see AI changing education?
So first off, I just want to thank everyone for coming out today. I think this is an important conversation and one that we're going to likely have a lot over the coming years because things are changing really quickly. As I was driving over today, I was thinking of an experience that I had when I was a student sitting in my first English class. We had gone to the library lab and we were being taught about tools. And our subject librarian came up and now, how many of you have heard of Wikipedia? And it was kind of a new thing. And a few of us raised our hands. And the librarian said, whatever you do, never go to it. This is going to be something that is blatantly false and full of lies and misdirection. So best bet, stick to those library databases. As we all know years later, why, yes, Wikipedia has its ups and downs. It is something that has integrated itself into our education system. And many of us teach our students that it can be a tool that you can use. My thought is that generative AI in all of its different forms, hopefully can seek to be this type of a tool if we can teach our students and each other the effective and ethical ways to do it. So directly to the question, how do I think it will impact education? I think it's going to be another one of those paradigm shifts that we're going to have to adapt and get used to. However, unlike paradigm shifts in the past, it's going to be something that is going to exponentially change over time, become more advanced, and is going to require kind of more foresight and continued conversations like this one. So I can see a couple of positives of the way the technology is headed in regards to higher education, but also some things that are going to be challenges. In the positive mechanism, there is a lot of information out there. One of the things that is difficult both for us as faculty and students is wading through the breadth of data. I train students to go to tournaments where they are given very short amount of time to sift through that data, gather ideas together, and then have to go in rounds where they have to ultimately slam that knowledge and that data against that of another team and behind them another coach. And so to an extent, I think some of these models are useful because they provide search engines that are able to synthesize and look through that and provide better information for folks to be able to access quicker as research starting points, much like Wikipedia was 10 years ago. And so in a highly dense information architecture, I think that tools like this might help folks simplify and sift through that information in a way that might be useful. Another way I see it is changing education, possibly for the better, is in terms of accessibility. We have struggled as educators over the last decade to be able to make our increasing media-rich pedagogies mesh well with accessibility tools, from everything to making sure that our Canvas pages work well to the materials and PDFs and things that we provide to students. It's a real challenge. And some of the things that I see promising coming out of this are AI-based tools that are going to be able to look through our courses faster, better identify those problems, and make information more accessible for students with different needs. And so those are a couple of things that kind of shot out to me as like some potential positives. Now, I'm sure that we're all familiar with some of the negatives. We have real concerns about academic integrity. There are AI tools that can run as companions on students' computers, and they can watch them take quizzes and live give them the correct responses, even if things aren't already out there on the web. And as sure as some of my English colleagues know, the ability for these tools to be able to generate and produce realistic looking student work obviously impacts the way that we think about assessment in all of our courses. Again, I kind of hope that these are challenges and that we can look for new teaching mechanisms to overcome these, but I don't want to understate the kind of like risk threat that this kind of poses towards us, as well as just kind of, I think there's this tendency to kind of get into this impeding feeling of doom, like how do I manage everything I'm already doing trying to do this. So I think those are the ultimate challenges that we'll have to look at different ways to overcome.
Thank you.
All right, would you pass the mic over to Penelope? All right, Penelope, how are you and your classmates using AI?
So I see AI being used in a number of different ways. As Ryan said, definitely there are people who are using AI as research starting points, which I think can be a very useful tool, right? Because it can be very difficult to generate those ideas, those research questions. But on the other hand, I worry about how are we developing our own critical thinking skills when we're relying on another tool to do that for us? Obviously, there's a lot of kind of plugging prompts in and hoping that pulls out an essay for you. And that is kind of a scary prospect to me, right? And I also see students using AI in a more positive way, maybe to help with time management. It can be really difficult, especially for students with like ADHD and maybe other executive functioning issues. It can be really difficult to manage a college course load in addition to work and life and all of that. And so I could see that being kind of like acting in the form of like a digital assistant. I can see that being a really useful tool without being too dangerous, right? So it's kind of thoughts there.
Oh, thank you. Mason, let's pass the mic. How are you and your classmates?
So I'm really glad that Wikipedia was brought up, because I feel like that's how it functions best, is if you use it less as a direct source of information and more as a jumping off point. Essentially, a lot of what ChatGPT and AIs in general can do is function as a sort of search engine, where you can input your question and it will gather a lot of jumping off points. But it's better than a lot of search engines in that a lot of search engines, if you do something that's hyper specific, they won't be able to pull as many results. But a language, I forget the exact term, but essentially an AI in that form can generate much more specific results and give you a point to start off for. So while of course there are some people who use it almost as a replacement for work and they just have it generate a large amount of text. For the most part, I think it is used as a way to supplement and begin things such as essays or research reports, but I think it's pretty rarely used as a substitute. And I think using it as a Wikipedia type resource is the best way to go about it. And I think that's how most people use it.
Thank you. Andrew,
Sure.
are next.
Okay.
I will ask you this question. How has AI changed the way you teach?
Okay, sure. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. Like previous people have said, I think this is an extremely important conversation, and I believe it's probably the first of many that we should have huge in terms of AI. Well, I think in some respects, how it's taught me or how it's made me rethink or think about how I teach it, it's very, very basic things that I did even prior to AI. So for instance, thinking about just course design. So reflecting on my assignment design, that's a really big thing. What's the purpose of an assignment? In particular, I think in an online class, am I having this discussion posed because I need to meet that Carnegie unit load, or because I'm paranoid that the students maybe haven't done the reading, or do I want them to complete this discussion post for another? So, you know, a lot of it is reflecting just on the purpose of my assignment design. So thinking about purpose, how I scaffold it. Am I providing peer models for students? Am I giving them, am I being very transparent in terms of explaining why I want them to do this task and how it's going to benefit them moving forward in terms of the outcomes? So some of these things, you know, I've always done. I've definitely provided more models with students. I've provided more peer models for students. I find often that when students do use AI, certainly if they use AI to generate their essays, their assignments, it's often because they don't understand the assignment, or maybe they don't have a clear understanding of what the finished product should be, to use that term. So I'm more deliberate, as I always was, but now I'm hyper deliberate, I think, in terms of, you know, providing lots of models to students, even walking them through models, like how to complete it, not only giving them the pure model, but walking them through how to complete it, and rationalizing or explaining to them how completing this skill, how it kind of fits into the previous skills and tasks we've done and how that leads us to the next. I think two other things too, how it's changed my teaching is definitely educating students on AI. Not only how it works, but we know what are the pitfalls with it, certainly in terms of hallucinations, things such as that. So what's the difference between AI assisted work and AI generative work? What are some ways we can use it that can actually increase our writing and critical thinking, and some ways that are counterproductive? And that's a work in progress. And I'm sure it is for a lot of people up here and hopefully in the audience. And I hope that's something that we can collaborate on as an institution to create really teaching materials for students. I think we need some really sleek teaching materials aside from what's already on the library and learning website. I think the other thing too is how it's really changed my teaching is, well, I don't think it's changed it, but it's caused me to reflect more on equity. And prior to this strange new world we're in with AI, certainly when we would talk about college readiness, which, let's do with that word whatever you will, readiness. We used to always say that we teach the students we have, not the students we wish we had. And I think that totally applies to where we find ourselves now. I think we all wish, and I know I'm in that boat, that or I think most of us, if we have writing at least, that we probably had students who they were the pre-AI students. I think we all wish we had those students still. And we still have some of those students. However, more and more of the students that we have and that we're teaching, they're becoming enmeshed in AI, and so that's important for us. It's important for me to learn about AI and to learn how to use it and to learn how to educate students on how to use it, because that's just their reality, whether I like it. And then I think the other thing it's made me think about too, and I've always thought about this, is I need to let go of the fear that AI is used to cheat. Do some students use it to cheat? Absolutely. Do some students use Google to cheat or Wikipedia to cheat? Hell yeah, they do. However, I think that when we just think about AI as a tool that students are going to use to be dishonest, I think it prevents us, or it makes it hard to really see the rich possibilities of AI in the classroom. And also, it just kind of reminds me that I'm not in the business to police. I'm in the business to teach. And so I just need to let go of that, just like I did with plagiarism. So I think that's really it. Those are the things.
This is a two-part question, so I'll ask one of you one part, one of the other. Has AI helped you be more successful in your schoolwork, and how?
So I feel like for me personally, it's definitely a net benefit. I feel like, in fact, I have an essay to write today and tomorrow. And what it's great at doing is, as I mentioned earlier, is if you have an idea of what you want to talk about, but you're not exactly sure where to jump off, you can ask it to give you a list of things, a list of subtopics, things of that nature. And while that can't substitute at choosing a topic, it will give you a wider understanding of like where to begin. And I feel like it's definitely helped me with time management and helped me with centralizing the things that I need to think about. By presenting it in like a neat list rather than spending, I don't know, 15-20 minutes looking through a Google search page on where to start. It's definitely helped me with my time management and knowing exactly where to jump on. Could you remind me the exact wording of the question, just so I know?
Sounds like a debater. Has AI helped you be more successful in your schoolwork, and how? So that
Got it,
sounds like you
okay.
got it.
So yeah, I just wanted to make sure I answered it well. So that's about it.
And then for Penelope, have you experienced any drawbacks from using AI?
So I'm a little old school. I don't use AI. To be honest, didn't really, before this experience, and I did a little bit more research, I really didn't understand what some of its applications could be as a college student outside of like those research topics. And like generating an essay for you, which I was, as a writing tutor, is obviously not up my alley, right? So, one of the drawbacks though that I have experienced even not using AI is that a lot of the AI detectors that are used through Turnitin or, you know, the Chat GPT detector system, I don't remember what that's called, but they're just not quite up to speed. And so you really can get false flag notifications on those. Which actually did happen to me last semester on like a discussion post that I had submitted. It got flagged for AI and I had just definitely not used it. So I was really surprised for that to happen. And it gave me an automatic 0 on the assignment. And so I was luckily able to have a conversation with the professor, super understanding. I think it was an online class and she hadn't really gotten to know me yet. And I feel that once she got to know me, she kind of understood the situation and, you know, it was remedied. But what happens when you're with somebody that, you know, doesn't really take the time to understand like your own capabilities? That would be something that would worry me in the future. So yeah, the AI detectors I think are right now have been the biggest drawback and kind of one of the scarier things for me with it.
Kathleen, what do you see as appropriate and useful ways to use AI?
Okay, I want to say two things first. And one is I've been here a long time and this moment reminds me a lot of when I was first hired in the late 90s. And when I was first hired, search engines were just kind of coming into, I mean, I was hired to teach a class and I was teaching like Alta Vista and Excite and Dogpile. And at that time, I remember there being real pushback from faculty who for years did not want students using the internet at all for sources. And it was just interesting to me because I'm you know, there's this dude named L.T. Morrison. I don't know if anybody's heard of him, but he was an old guy who wrote on like technology and culture, and he taught at MIT and he taught at Yale, and he's oft quoted by these kind of OG tech guys who I listen to a lot of on podcasts. And he talks about like these stages of new technology, and like stage 1 being we ignore it, which Jason Woolstatter's here. I feel like everybody on earth was ignoring AI except Jason Woolstatter. He was so into it like 15 years ago. I used to call his class the science fiction English class. He did not ignore it, but we tend to ignore it. And then we get really skeptical. Well, they're never going to, you know, before large language models, they're never going to be able to think like humans. And then we get rage. Then the last stage is name calling and rage, because we realize that this is going to herald this complete restructuring of existing power structures, which it kind of is. So I wanted to say that like this is familiar and that gives me comfort. Like I know that this is what has happened with man and technology, humans and technology from time immemorial, and we're going to make it through, and that contextualizing that helps me. And I also just want to say I have to teach it because I teach internet literacy, and which I taught for the first time this semester, and I teach information literacy, and I would be ashamed not to be telling my, like, you can't get through an internet literacy class and not know what AI is and how it's developed. And I really like, because it's going to be so much a part of our culture, I think it's crucial our students know how to use it, and it's going to change, and maybe how they use it now is not going to be how they use it, but it actually seems an extreme disservice. And I say that because when I was showing my students in my face-to-face class, I was using it to get started with research. And I had one student, some of my students are here, wasn't you guys, but you remember, Michael was just like, I'm not supposed to look at that. Like, I felt like I was showing pornography in class. You know what I mean? He was like, no, I can't look at this. My teacher is told me like not to look at this. And I was, Michael is here. I was like, I'm not showing you something evil, right? This is gonna be part of the world. So I just wanted to say those things. And what has already been said, like research starting points. I was thinking a nice thing for people to do that they might feel comfortable with is a lot of people send students to the library for research starting points. And my colleagues, if you come to us, and you know, I'm embedded in an English 103 class. They have to create a topic based on one of the class themes. And that can be really hard for them until they can see a list. So it's really nice to go to ChatGPT and say, hey, what are some ways I could develop a topic on an undergraduate paper topic on the theme of identity? And it just gives a great list of ideas. And that's what I do. Like, if they're not using ChatGPT, that's what I do. Like, you could do this, or you could do this. Like, what seems interesting to you? And I think that's a good equity. Like, a lot of people don't feel comfortable using the library. There's a lot of people who have not trust that if they ask for help, they're going to get help. And so sometimes the students that most need our help don't actually ask. So I like that, oh, there's this tool, they could do that. Research questions. I have a student in my class this semester who's doing cancel culture, which I'm really into. So I'm always using, you know, so we learn in my class how to write research questions and how to use research questions to guide inquiry into our topic. And we come up with them, and she's super smart and came up with a bunch of them, but running that, like, what are some research questions that could guide inquiry into the topic of cancel culture? And there are great research questions there. And it's not like they have the answers. And again, this is something a librarian would do. I would sit there and write out the list for your student. Here's some research questions. Go answer these. And so I think those are good, not just legitimate ways to use them, but also a good way to actually like almost assign it, like, see, play around with it, go talk to Stella, and then put that into ChatGPT and see the difference. One thing I did for my internet literacy students was I assigned this great article from The Atlantic by Adrienne LaFrance, who I have a huge crush on. She's awesome. She's written about human and technology for decades. And then I had ChatGPT write an essay. And I fed it the prompt, right? Write a 2,000-word essay discussing, you know, the conflict between humanity and technology and some of the particular problems AI. And I had my students compare those. And they were quite different. You know, the human, like, harken back to Emerson. It was very beautiful and poetic, and ChatGPT was great too, but it was like very bulleted list. And it was just a very interesting, I did a discussion. That was one of the most interesting discussions. People were like flipped out about the differences. And I just think that's really important that we have our students use it so they don't get out of our institution of higher education not knowing about this tool and not knowing how to harness this tool and not knowing the ethical and dangerous potential harmful aspects of this tool, but they have to have those skills and that knowledge if they're going to compete.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. So our next question is for our students. So pass that to Penelope first. What would you like to tell your teachers about AI and its use? I know that some of this is probably, you know, connecting with what you just talked about, but.
Right, that's, yeah, kind of the same points, but I guess kind of going back to my last point about the AI detectors, I guess what I would tell my professors is just using discretion when you do get an assignment that gets flagged. Maybe instead of like giving an automatic 0, which trust me, like, I don't blame you. Like, I can only imagine how frustrating it must be to assign something and then get something that is clearly not human made, right? But I think maybe sitting down, having a face-to-face chat before you make the decision that yes, this was AI generated, is still kind of the safest bet. Another thing is which I think has been covered by you guys, but it's covering like what is appropriate use of AI in class and what's not appropriate, and really educating students on it so that they know how it can benefit them, and they know exactly like why it's important to also develop your own critical thinking skills, why it's important to learn how to use the resources that the library has to offer, learn how to interact with your librarian and have them teach you how to create your own research questions. Those are all still equally as important, I think, but it is a more equitable option, like Kathleen was saying, for students who are able or maybe don't feel comfortable going to a librarian if they do have that option. So I think having more conversations like what we're doing right now is ultimately kind of the most important thing. Kind of having an open forum with your students at the beginning of a semester, especially those students that are kind of just coming in, you know, their freshman year and just learning how to navigate college, right? I think that that's really important.
Thanks. And then Mason, again, I'll read the question. What would you like to tell your teachers about AI and its use?
So I think the most important thing to remember about AI is that it's very much a tool. In the same way that a knife in the right person's hands can be either a weapon or something to make food, AI can serve the same purpose. Where in the wrong person's hands, it can be a way to dispute or get rid of academic integrity. It can also be a great way to build a very good essay or a very good class in general. And in that way, I think that really it's important to consider the way that we look at AI. Because if you treat AI as something that is a threat, something that is just a potential threat to the quality of education, then that's very much how people are going to treat it. People who want to use it are going to use it to replace the work that they do. People who and the people who don't want to use AI are going to see it as an inherent threat. But if we instead look at how AI can be utilized, similar to what she was saying, if we teach the way that it can be appropriately used, it can become a benefit, another tool for students to help enhance their education rather than being treated as something that should inherently be avoided. Because the more you try to push against it, the more people are going to figure out ways to get around it. But if we get ahead of it and try to integrate it into education and teach the ways you should use it rather than teaching that you should only not use it, then I think we stand to benefit from a lot. So if I was to simplify that into a one-sentence answer, basically, I would tell them to think about how we can integrate it into education as a whole.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Good advice. All right, our final question will be posed to Olga. And before we open up this discussion to members of the audience. So Olga, what's the most important piece of advice you have for students or teachers using AI?
I would say, or I would echo some of the experts in the field that say that one of the most important skills to develop is to become really good at framing problems. So identifying problems, analyzing, and so I'll walk you through an example. So last fall, I facilitate learning for tutors, and last fall, I identify a problem, which was, we don't have a college-wide policy on AI, but I would like for my students to know what my stance is. So that was a problem, right? I needed to communicate that to my students. So the analyze part is, okay, so what tool could help me with the problem that I have? And in my case, the generative AI tool that I chose to use was ChatGPT because it was free. It was, I had read an article about it. I had learned about it at the online teaching conference. And so, okay, so then, after I identify it, then delineating the problem. So as Kathleen was giving you various examples to some of the prompts. So in my case, I told ChatGPT who I was, what my problem was. So I was being very specific. I was giving ChatGPT what the boundaries, I was being very specific. I'm teaching this course at a community college, and this is what I want, what I would like. And I found out extremely helpful. And so after you become a really good problem solver or identifier, you also need to be to use your critical thinking skills, because once you get the output of your query, you need to look at it and say, well, does this make sense? Is this really does this represent what I think? And so then looking at the information and really use your critical thinking skills to decide, is this something useful, not, and then also going back and perhaps running a different query if the one that you initially ran did not make sense. So that is something that I have found useful when I don't have the language, and being really so at times redefining the problem, or really figuring out exactly what it is, what is the reason why you're wanting to use a tool, such as again ChatGPT or another generative AI.
Thank you, Olga. And all of the panelists, thanks so much. That was perfect timing. We've got about 20 minutes now for open questions. I was looking, so we're live streaming this, and I was looking over the comments made on the live stream. And most of them seem to come from professors talking about rampant cheating in their classes and looking for direction from the college. And I just want to reach out to you and let you know that the Senate has formed a small AI work group, and we are working, our mission is to create a guidance document that will be taken to Senate. We were waiting for the State Academic Senate plenary session, which is happening next week. I think it's mid-April that it's happening. And they had a resolution this year that they would come up with guidance for California community colleges by plenary in the spring. So we're kind of waiting for that. Until then, I'll send out to the people who attended on live stream a research guide that we've created for faculty. And there are sample policies in there. And one that we really love that Mike Medshammer pointed out to us is the one from Sonoma State. So you can feel free to look at that. I know that SLAE has a school policy that the dean has encouraged faculty to include in the syllabus, and we can make that available to you as well. But I think one thing is to just have a very honest conversation at the beginning of the semester and let students know what the expectation is. One thing we haven't really talked about today are the downfalls of AI, and there are many, and they fall in different categories. Academic honesty is one of those categories. And excuse me, I'm ill right now, so my brain isn't thinking very well. But some others are ethical concerns. They basically take information from people who have not authorized the use of that information, and they're feeding it to these AI models for the AI models then to reproduce that information. So there are huge issues with that, with copyright and ethical issues. There's also the issue of labor. I mean, it takes an awful lot of cheap labor to generate all the energy that's used to train on these huge amounts of data. So we've got labor issues. There are also Oh darn, I lost that thought. Well, never mind on that one. But I'd like to open it for questions from the audience. If you raise your hand, I'll give you the box.
Sure.
Just speak up. Do any students have any questions? Or any comments?
Iris, can I speak to some of the questions that we're getting online?
Yes.
So,
And some of them are from your area.
oh, even better. Explains why I'm getting phone calls from Professor McKissick in the middle of this.
Well, that's
I was having a conversation with my wife about this the other day, and she brought a funny anecdote that she saw on Instagram that when I thought about AI in the future, that I really wanted AI to, do the laundry and wash the dishes instead, so that I can focus on writing and creating art. And seems like it's the other way around, right? And so I think that fear is kind of inherent here, that as we move into this generation, that we're going to lose the creative aspects that are such an important part of study and being a member of a civil society. And so I fully understand those. I don't want to seem like some of my comments are disregarding that in terms of the academic integrity and concerns that folks have. My fear, and maybe why I find myself trying to lean more towards the how do we embrace this and use this ethically, is that there will be no effective tool over the course of time to truly direct and prove that folks are using AI in the same way that we were able to with plagiarism. I think that the models that have attempted to do AI detection have gotten better over the last year. And recently Turnitin released some data where they looked at all of the submissions prior to the advent of AI compared to after it, and they showed that there were no false positives with their current model. Not to say there weren't problems last semester, but they've gotten better at that. In other words, when Turnitin says it predicts something and it's giving that high positivity rate, there's a pretty strong likelihood that it is. Tools like GPT-0 that I know a lot of my colleagues are using also are pretty good at detecting AI. What they're not good at is the mechanisms to get around it. I was having a conversation with a colleague about this other day, and I plugged it in. I'm like, write a 5-paragraph essay on the life and exploits of Aristotle, and it picked it up, and GPT-0 100% got it. And then I augmented the prompt and I said, write this in the voice of a second-year college student, including 2 or 3 minor grammatical errors. GPT-0, 100% human at that point. So to a certain extent, why it is good at detecting the easy versions of it, the technology is going to advance further and further, making it harder to detect, but also the more savvy users of it are going to find ways to get around it. And this is why along with the fact that GPT-0 on their website says, do not use this to punish folks, use this as a learning tool, do not use this as a means to crack down. And all of Turnitin's data is proprietary. It makes it really difficult if your assessment of work is being academically dishonest is challenged to be able to prove that, right? When we get an essay that's plagiarized, we pull it up, it's pretty obvious, right? Well, here's the source, word for word, right? You deleted this section and this section, but otherwise you copied and pasted it. We don't have that same ability to prove. And I was talking to a colleague of mine who's on the academic integrity board up at Chico State. And last semester, it's somewhere in the range of 400 formal academic accusations at Chico of students using GPT. And in every single one of them that got escalated to an investigation, they found in favor of the students because they didn't find that the data could prove beyond reasonable doubt that it had occurred. So again, all of this is kind of up in the air. I just think the detection is difficult. And so it has required me to kind of step back and think about my own teaching, how can I augment my own assessment methods in this world to still be able to see formative assessment and see growth, knowing that it's not going to ever be purely possible for anyone at any college to ultimately crack down on this. And that's just kind of why I lean towards that. Whatever policy we come up with, I just don't think it's going to overcome that. That said, we did pass one thing recently through Senate.
Yeah.
Currently, you could only be accused of academic dishonesty if you were accused of copying another person. We wordsmithed that and changed it, so work that wasn't your own to encompass AI. So we're still working.
I just want to say this, and it's probably not that effective for some people, but I've really been struggling because you do get, it's hard not to take it personally as a professor when you're working really hard on curriculum, especially if you love it and you think it's exciting and you expect other people to love it like you do. And one of the things I've been obsessed with listening. I love listening to people talk about AI who know way more than me about computer science and engineering. And one of the common threads I hear from all of them across disciplines is this idea of owning knowledge and how, and I tell my students, it's like, I feel like I'm being so threatening, but I'm like, in the end, if all you can do is feed a query into a computer and get a fact, a computer can do that. Like, and you may make it through class and get your piece of paper, but you're going to be in a room with people. And we just did, when you talk to people, you can see that they know how to connect ideas across disciplines and across time. And huh?
And AI can't do that.
And
now.
AI can't do that. And really, I laugh when I listen to these guys who are just like, oh, AI is going to free up so much time for us to do like the fun thinking. And it's like, well, that's great because you think thinking is fun. And I guess I see myself as really inspired even more than I have been, which has been pretty intense, about sharing with my students the value of a liberal arts education and how important it is to be able to learn and own your knowledge. And then, then you're not going to be replaced. But yeah, if all you can do is like look up an answer and not own it, I think they could be in real trouble.
And I think one thing I wanted to say that I blanked out on is that for the people who are live streaming in, I think it's important to have students understand that it's not a panacea. I mean, I think that's what Kathleen is saying too. Talk to your students about the drawbacks of using AI. And I think Kathleen's argument is very good, but being a librarian, I think the fact that most of what it's being fed now is coming from the free web. And so it's being fed information that people created with all our biases and all of our imperfections. And if you're just relying on that without really thinking through what it is, what arguments you're wanting to make and how you want to approach your assignment, then you really are doing a disservice. And I think if you have conversations with students about the downfall of it, the weaknesses of it, as well as how it can be used, then you have a much more full classroom where you're trusting each other and working with each other and teaching each other rather than just turning into the police.
Second to.
Yes.
So I know I already mentioned this, but we're talking about like the role that AI plays in education. And I think we've learned throughout history that anytime you try to take a prohibition style approach where you just say, no, this isn't allowed, people are going to get around it. And like Ryan was saying, if you can think about how to correct the prompt to where it seems natural, you can basically get around any kind of detector. And the more accurate the detectors become, the more skilled people are going to become at avoiding those detectors. And so I think it's very clear that it is better to, essentially the choice we have is, do we just completely forbid its use and let the people who are willing to skirt those laws or rules decide how AI is used? Or do we, as she mentioned, have a discussion about it, talk to people about what is okay and what isn't, and then set the terms for how AI is going to be used. So it's very clear that no matter what, we open Pandora's box, AI is here. And the question is, are we going to try to regulate it, or are we just going to ban it and let it regulate itself? And I think we've seen throughout history that letting something regulate itself is not a good idea. So it's clear that we should embrace AI and figure out what role it should play in education rather than outright trying to ignore it or trying to prevent it.
Thank you. And I've got a question I'd like to ask of the audience. Anybody here can answer it. Multiple people can answer it. Other than what we've heard today, can you add anything to the question? What are you most excited or concerned about AI with regards to AI use in your classes? I know there, yes.
What's concerned about is.
Sorry.
So one thing, as a faculty member that has me concerned about a little bit is, the new, AI powered, writing tools, like the new Grammarly. And, you know, I think there's no dispute about, whether using AI to generate ideas that you claim as your own is academic dishonesty. But I'm kind of curious about, a little worried about these writing tools that can take your ideas, but kind of rewrite it and rephrase it in a way that's you know, I'm curious of, you know, how we're going to deal with that, people's ability to write and generate ideas, and that, you know, whether or not using this technology to essentially clean it up and almost rewrite it for you, that's also considered academic dishonesty too.
I just wanted to, if I could respond to that. I've been thinking a lot lately about the ambiguity of these tools and just how fast the major tech companies are like pushing them into our face. I mean, we're a year into this at this point, and I noticed that like Gmail and I think Outlook are already like, oh, this looks like you're sending a professional email. Would you like me to improve the way that you read this to make it more professional? I was on a Google Doc the other day and it's like, need help getting started, and it's already pushing Gemini into my face on that. And so the reality is that these tools, when even they're packaged under something that we've been telling to use students like Grammarly, now there's something that just seems very similar to Grammarly Go, and it's fully constructing papers. So it seems like we're kind of being held at the mercy of the tech companies because no one's tapping the brakes. It's just like, oh, someone's, you know, Google's doing it. We got to get it in our products.
That's what we have to teach, like what's good and what's bad.
Yeah, like it's there, and it seems as innocuous to the lay user as spell check, right? Like, oh yeah, why wouldn't I want Google to proofread my paper? That seems like the obvious thing to do. And so, and I don't know how we push back against that directly when, you know, we can try to be those voices of logic and reason, but to a certain extent, when we've got just a handful of tech companies that basically control the entire way through which we mediate all communication that we do, pushing these tools to the forefront. Copilots, I think, now rolled out on all Windows 11, which is Microsoft's ChatGPT-4 powered tool. It's just there, it's everywhere. And so I think it's going to be really difficult to forbid it just because it's like, well, isn't using it the default now? And it's wild to me how fast that paradigm shift has happened in folks' minds. But that, I think that's the reality of when you've got just a couple of companies that basically control every bit of software that we use.
Does anybody else have anything you'd like to say or ask or add to the conversation? Yes. Well, you did.
Online.
Oh,
Open like
gotcha,
one
gotcha.
recording.
well, one concern I have is for like young creative writers, like with softwares like Grammarly and ChatGPT. They'll sort of correct you and say this is the right way to say it, or you know, that's not right. Whereas, you know, you see a lot of in a lot of novels like or books by Cormac McCarthy, he doesn't use proper grammar, but it enhances his creative style, and it's sort of different from like the, you know, the just sort of the average. So I feel like Grammarly and some of these other softwares like just are gonna homogenize all of our writing styles in a way and make it to where there's nothing new and nothing stands out anymore. It's all the same.
That's a great point. That means shape.
Kind of to add to that, Penelope, hi. You're not the first English major I've met who's run into the similar issue of having your work docked for, AI, when some of us just like, sometimes they use terminology. I was talking to a student who also had, his work docked because he used a very specific term, to describe something that otherwise does not have a descriptor. And it's like, I'm also concerned, there's just someone who's trying to turn in like basic work, or what I consider basic work, and what some other students would consider basic work. I'm concerned about that being, yeah, just our voices being eliminated, and like, ever since I started reading these stories, I'm like, okay, I need to not use this word, because I know from this professor and this source that AI uses these words, so I can't use it myself. And, a lot of the ones that AI like spits out aren't very human, but I'm starting to get concerned that AI is gonna learn more human words, and I don't want to censor myself. Like, I don't want the AI to sound more human and not, and humans to sound more like AI. That makes sense. Yeah.
That's a good point.
So first thing I want to bring up is what the gentleman in the orange polo brought up. So specifically, I think there is an issue in regards to, I believe the word is homogeneity, essentially homogeny. That's the word I was looking for. The idea that if we allow a computer to enforce what is considered accepted and what is common, then it kind of forces a level of conformity, or at least it sets the idea that this is what is expected of us. And I will say that that is definitely a concern of AI. When you have a machine that is built to say, this is right, this is wrong, the gray area that is style and creativity in general is simply not really something AI can exist with. It's a system that is pretty inherently yes or no. So I will say, I would just like to essentially agree with what he was saying, that especially when it comes to art, that AI is very much an area where the more it's implemented, the more we stand to lose for creativity. Because when you have a system that is yes or no, there is no, here's this thing that makes people uncomfortable, but advances what we think about. And in regards to what she was saying, it also has the issue of if you have to adapt yourself to not seem like an AI, then maybe the idea is that we're focusing on the wrong problem. I already mentioned that we should incorporate it, and that's another good example of why we should incorporate AI into our understanding, because it's essentially created this, I don't want to say witch hunt, but essentially the idea that professors are constantly on the lookout for, is this AI or is this original? And so long as we focus on trying to determine that, we lose the benefits of the AI and exacerbate the negatives of it. If we instead focused on understanding the role that AI can play, instead of trying to figure out, did this person do this bad thing, then we would stand to benefit a lot more, and people would be allowed to express themselves more openly without a fear of having AI or having their whatever they made be flagged as AI and being punished for it.
Thank you. Well, we have come to the end of our hour. If anybody has any last thoughts they'd like to share, that'd be great. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming. And I agree with our panelists who said we need to have many more of these conversations. I'm hoping this is just the beginning and the first of many that we'll have. So thank you.
Thank you.
And if anybody needs to scan a QR code for Flex, or if you're a student seeking extra credit, just scan it over there, please.
I didn't ask my
Okay, go for it.
And if you have a student.
Okay, so this goes